Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things firearms. Firearms policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So please take a moment, like and share the program, and let your friends know this is the place to be. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook so that way, in both cases, make sure you hit the notification button. That way you get the alerts as soon as we go live. That way you can participate in the live chat as the show is going on. Also, visit fpcgear.com. That's fpcgear.com. It is the place to go to find all sorts of Pro 2A swag. Very cool stuff. New t-shirts, new coffee mugs, new hoodies all the time. And the best part about it is every dollar that you spend goes right back into the fight for a right to keep and bear arms. So you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. That's fpcgear.com. Well, you guys know that I come to you from the belly of the beast, from the state of California, the capital of the state of California, where all sorts of anti-gun cockamamie ideas are created and shared with the rest of the world. So there was an article that I came across a while ago, and I apologize that I'm just now getting to it to talk to you guys about it. But it was done by the San Jose Mercury News, and they actually did an analysis of a number of key pieces of anti-gun legislation and wanted to see how effective it was in doing what they said it was going to do. I found it interesting because, first of all, the Mercury News is definitely not a pro-gun publication. I was real curious to see exactly what they would have to say. And I was actually somewhat pleasantly surprised. So I went back and I read the article. So the first thing that they talked about assault weapons, right? They're talking about assault weapons. Now, in the state of California, you are not allowed to own a firearm. It is considered an assault weapon if it has a detachable magazine, in particular a detachable magazine that holds more than 10 rounds, if it has a collapsible stock, or if it has a muzzle, a flash suppressor, or a forward pistol grip, or a pistol grip. This is what's considered a quote-unquote assault rifle in the state of California. Now, up until recently, you could have a detachable magazine if it required a tool to remove it. In our case, it was considered a bullet button. The bullet button was one that was used. Those firearms have since been banned. So, what have been the results, or what have they found? They're saying that the impact is hard to measure. Now, why do you ask? I know you're asking because I was wondering the same thing. How could you say that it is hard to measure? Well, it's largely because even though these bans have been in place, at various different versions of the ban, whether it's the federal ban or the state ban in the state of California, we've still had some of the most high-profile mass shootings. We had the Gilroy shooting. We had the Garlic Festival. We had the shooting that took place at the Borderline shooting. We had the Poway shooting at the synagogue in Poway. We've had a number of significant mass shootings. Tehama County, San Bernardino. All of these have taken place while we've had one version or another of the assault weapons ban here in the state of California. And some folks want to say, well, they got their firearms from out of state. Well, actually, only in the Gilroy instance did they determine that the person purchased the firearm from out of state. The point that I'm making here is that people who want to commit these crimes, who want to commit these mass shootings, well, guess what? They're getting their firearms anyway, regardless of what the law says. So that's basically what that points out is exactly what they say. Now, once again, this is what Mercury News is saying. They're saying it's hard to measure. I'm saying it's been completely and utterly ineffective. So I guess that's their way of kind of getting around, actually having to tell the truth. Okay, so moving right along. So now we have magazine capacity limits. So in the state of California, you are limited to magazines that hold 10 rounds or less. Now, up until recently, it was illegal to purchase or sell them or manufacture them, but you could actually own them if you possessed them before before the magazine ban took place, which was in the early 90s. Now, mind you, this is something that's important to note. There was a week during, just during during this year, actually, where a judge actually ruled a magazine ban to be unconstitutional. He would eventually stay his decision. But what happened was there was a week between the time in which he made his decision and the time in which he stayed it. And as a part of that stay, he allowed people who purchased magazines during that week to be able to keep them. You guys might remember that week because if you went to the gun store during that week to purchase a magazine, you couldn't find them. You couldn't find them because we here in California purchased them all. Yeah, we were America for about a week. But suffice it to say that, now there are literally millions of standard capacity magazines now safe and in common use here in the state of California. Moving right along. So then the impact that they've determined has been, it's been difficult to measure. Once again, largely because while this ban has been in place, people are still able to use them, or even more so, people are still utilizing firearms to commit mass murders. They're still utilizing firearms to commit suicide. Now, these are not the only tools that they are using to commit these things. I'm just saying, I'm talking about it in the context of this particular thing, is that what they're finding is that it didn't have an impact. Once again, not my words, San Jose Mercury. San Jose Mercury News. It's their words. They're the ones who are saying this. So I just for those of you out there who may be watching thinking, oh, well, he's not objective. No, I'm not objective on this particular issue. But once again, I'm using the words of someone who supposedly is, or at the very least is not on our side. All right. Then there's been background checks for ammunition purchases. So here in the state of California, we have restrictions when it comes to ammunition. You have to purchase ammunition through an ammunition vendor, a licensed ammunition vendor, or if they're already an FFL, they're automatically licensed as vendors. You have to go through a background check, although it's not really a background check. What they do is they check and see if you have, we have this program called APHIS, where if you've purchased a firearm legally, your information is in there. If your information is in there, in their eyes, well, if you are legally able to own a firearm, well, then you must be okay to purchase ammunition. The problem is that if you purchased a firearm before APHIS existed, before we had this sort of back-end registration, then you can't purchase ammunition. If you are from out of state, you cannot purchase ammunition, or you have to go through a background check, a full background, where you have your information put into APHIS. And I still don't know exactly how that works. We have found that the background check system here in the state of California is a hot mess. It is just bad. We told them it would be bad, but they still have yet to find a way to really make it functional and make it work the way it should work, or the way they said it would work. But there are a lot of people who are being denied the ability to purchase ammunition here in the state of California, who, by the way, should legally be able to purchase ammunition. But see, in their eyes, well, it's not a big deal if law-abiding citizens are not just inconvenienced. If they say inconvenienced, I say their rights are being trampled on because a right delayed is a right denied. But, that's just me. So let's see now. What has been the impact? The impact they're saying, it says, remains to be seen. One, because it hasn't been in place very long. And number two, the implementation has been, well, as I said before, it's been a hot mess. It's been horrible. The problems and the issues that they are having are exactly the problems and issues we said they would have. And it's kind of funny because they come to us and they want us to help them fix it, to come up with suggestions on how they can fix it. And the only suggestion I've been able to offer is scrap it, toss it out, because you can't implement it. Which is why, by the way, what they should do. In Nevada, when they passed background checks on firearms, on all firearm purchases, the way in which it was written, it couldn't be implemented. And the Attorney General basically came back to him and said, I'm sorry, this law is not implementable, and didn't implement it. And that's really what this attorney general should have done. But we all know that Javier Becerra, being as anti-gun as he is, well, he's more interested in being anti-gun than he is in actually following the law and the Constitution. So he's going to do what he's going to do. All right. Then we get into the armed prohibited persons. Now, here in the state of California, we have a list. So what happened? Well, not really a list. It's a couple of lists that they put together. So what they do is they take a list of people who are in, I told you about AFS. So they take that system, right? And it's an automated firearms system. So what they do is they say, take people who are there. That's everyone. That's people who've purchased, that we know have purchased a firearm, right? And then we cross that against people who are prohibited from owning firearms. People who have been convicted of felonies or prohibiting misdemeanors, people who have restraining orders against them, people who have a gun violence restraining, whatever it is. The group of people who are not supposed to own or possess firearms. And they mash those two lists together, and then anyone who is on both lists is now considered an armed prohibited person. Now, the problem with it is multi-phase. Number one, just because you're not an AFIS doesn't mean you are not armed. That's number one. Number two, just because you may be on one of the lists does not necessarily mean that you are prohibited, because there are a couple of issues. Number one, in many of those issues, whether it's the restraining orders or some of the convictions, in some cases the names are wrong. So in other words, you have Bob Smith. You could be Bob C. Smith, but if Bob A. Smith is prohibited, but Bob C. Smith is not, you could still be flagged and not, once again, be listed as a prohibited person. Or you also have cases where the courts or the Department of Justice hasn't updated the prohibited persons list. Like they say, for example, a restraining order. Most restraining orders are temporary. They're not permanent restraining orders, which means that you may have one now, you may be prohibited now, but you may not be prohibited later. Well, if it's not updated and they're not told that your name is off that list, then guess what? Your name stays on the list and you are now prohibited. And by the way, they're sending people out to people's homes to confiscate these firearms. And once again, they're showing up, well, armed and ready to confiscate firearms. So it's important to note what this list is. The list is it is so horribly bad, and when I say bad, I mean it is inaccurate, and they've done very little to actually try and fix the list. I'll just say they've done very little to try and fix it. But that's the armed prohibited persons list, right? So let's get a little bit more into the details. So what they found is gun homicides did decrease 24% from 2006 to 2017. Now, some people would just simply point to the fact that more people have purchased firearms during that time. That's what I would point to. But once again, that was a national trend, not just a trend here in the state of California. So I think that's important for us to note. But here's the other thing. Gun suicides actually increased during that same time period. 22%. Now, remember, two-thirds of all gun deaths are suicides, which basically means in this case that there actually have been more deaths as a result of firearms because, well, of the during the time of the armed prohibited persons list. So that means, once again, the impact is unclear. So in other words, they can't tell you what the impact is. So far we're 0 for 3. Now let's get into gun violence restraining orders. Now, many of you across the country know these as red flag laws. This is where an individual, you may or may not know, can go to a judge, claim that you are a danger to yourself or others, and have your right to keep and bear arms taken away, the right to own or possess a firearm for self-defense. But additionally, in the state of California, what also is issued is a gun seizure warrant, where law enforcement is now given the ability to search your home, your place of business, wherever they believe you may have a firearm. And once again, when they come a knocking, it ain't with flowers and candy. They come armed to the teeth, ready to, in the event that you don't want to give up your firearms. So let's see what they've found out about gun violence restraining orders here in the state of California. In 2016 to 2018, 614 GVROs were issued. Now, mind you, 424 of them were issued last year alone. That's 2018, meaning there weren't many of them before. I mean, literally it tripled in 1 year from the first 2 years. And the impact has basically been increased number of gun confiscations. And this is important to note because, see, they claim this as a success. Now, what they don't tell you about these gun confiscations, what they don't tell you about it is this, is first, about 50%, and I need to check the numbers again, but about 50% of those wind up, now, the ex parte hearings actually wind up getting reversed. So meaning by the time you eventually go to court, the court determines the individual is not a danger to themselves or others. So half the time, these things never should have been put in place. So I think that's important to note, number one. So half the times these things are false. Now, of the times where it's been determined that they are false, 60% of the time, they don't get their guns back. Because, see, in the state of California, it's not mandatory. There's no process by which they are mandated to give you your guns back. There's a whole legal process you have to go through to get your guns back. So think about this. You had your rights taken away in an ex parte hearing where you weren't there, you didn't know about it. You had your rights taken away. They sent someone to your home to take away your property. You went, you got a lawyer, you did whatever you had to do in order to be able to get your rights back, right? You go to court and they determine your rights never should have been taken away. And yet you still don't get your property back. You have to go through a whole nother legal process to petition to get your guns back from the government. And by the way, you're not guaranteed an attorney. You have to pay for an attorney out of pocket because it's not actually a criminal proceedings. You have to pay for your attorney out of pocket in order to get your rights back and in order to get your guns back. When we've already determined that over half the time it was BS. And by the way, then at the same time, the government is going to continue to try and keep your firearms. So what's the big takeaway from this particular article? The big takeaway is exactly what we said. Yeah, these laws are not going to have an impact. They are not going to make a difference because someone who wants to commit suicide, which makes up 2/3 of all gun deaths, they're going to find a way to commit suicide if that's what they choose to do. And most of the firearms that they're going after are not firearms that are used in crimes, right? The semi-automatic centerfire rifles with detachable magazines that they want to use are used in less than 3% of all firearms crimes. So they're going after law-abiding citizens and they're taking away their rights. They are going after firearms that are not used in crimes. And they're building this all on information and databases that, number one, are completely and wholly, they don't work. They're non-functioning. And they're put together, and these laws are written by people who don't know guns, don't know gun policy, they don't know the gun industry, they don't know the technology, and they don't know how all of it intersects. And then you wonder why you have people like that putting together these laws, and then you wonder why the laws don't work. Well, they work in the way in which they're interested, and that is it gets them in the news, it gets them their press conferences, it gets them a chance to say, I did something. Anyway, food for thought. All right, folks, well, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for liking and sharing the program and telling your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them, or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.